Welcome to the podcast, Scott.
Thanks for having us.
Definitely. I think a good place to start would be having you run through a little bit about your background and your journey and what really brought you to what you're doing today with Digital Shovel.
Awesome. So I've had a couple different startups. Prior to this, I had one renting cars for Uber drivers who didn't have their own vehicles when Uber first started in Toronto. And crypto was starting to at least just, I mean, it wasn't starting to take off. It already had a couple of times, but at least to me, it seemed like it was starting to take off. I started to dabble into it. Never on the trading side, a little bit of Ethereum mining, one GPU. I think it was like a RX 280 or I can't remember, R280 or something like that. Graphics card, a couple of those in my condo. One thing led to another. It was, convert a room in the condo, convert 2 rooms in the condo, then an industrial unit. That was, let's see, that would have been early 2017. So it was a pretty good rush there from low hundreds, sub $100 up to, I think it was 400 and some odd dollars in July 2017. And as we kept on running out of space to put these units, we decided, okay, let's go the container route and pulled some money together. I think we got, let's say 300 or 400 graphics cards that we built our first container with, hired some trades to do that, designed the container, but hired trades to do the assembly of it. And that was going good. And people started asking us, oh, you built this container. Can you coordinate one for me? And you got to remember, this is like start of 2018. So even though the price had fallen off, people were still crazy about mining. And I kind of pivoted and started building containers, and that formed Digital Shovel, and the rest was kind of history.
Yeah. And that's really interesting that you guys just kind of did it because people were asking you to kind of build out those containers. And it's also interesting that you went with the containerized design because there are many different, just depending on the miner you're speaking with. Some are very into shipping containers, others are more into the facility type of build out. So maybe if you could speak a little bit about what the idea behind going the shipping container route is, and maybe what those considerations are when you're deciding how you want to build out your facility.
Yeah, there's 2 elements that I like about shipping containers or containerized solutions. I mean, we'll get into this later, but we've actually moved completely away from using shipping containers. We build our own structures. They're still modular from scratch now. But the repeatability of it. So, I mean, when you do it in a building, that's fine. And there's lots of great opportunities with buildings, but either you're going to build your own building from scratch, which some people have the resources and funds to do that. But there's a lot more permitting and it's a longer process to do that. And if you're going to convert a brownfield or an existing site, there's lots of kind of one-off headaches that come with that. Whereas when you're doing a container and you're copying and pasting over and over again, it's the same thing. And there's some consistency there, which is nice. The other thing that I like a lot about containers is the ratio of intake area to exhaust area in relation to your amount of floor space. If you're going to do a building and you've got 50,000 square foot building, you don't have, generally speaking, 50,000 square feet of wall surface to use exhaust and intake area. So you have to move a much higher volume of air through a much smaller aperture, which it can be done and lots of people do it. It just requires a lot more work and a lot more engineering to make that happen. And generally speaking, your PUE or the energy cost for that ventilation in relation to the amount of energy your data center is consuming is not going to be as efficient. That's not to say it can't be made efficient, but it's not going to be as efficient because those fans are having to work that much harder to pull that air through an atmosphere of higher negative static pressure.
Yeah. And so when you're thinking about actually designing these and building out those facilities, what are those main components that you're paying attention to? I mean, it seems like you've learned a lot as you've continued to go and build and scale your operations. What are some of those lessons?
Where to start?
I know that miners have a lot of stories. There's a lot of trial and error. So a lot to that question.
In our first container that we built for ourselves with louvers, we were definitely trying to pull a lot of air through there. And when you get into a situation, and generally speaking, the engineering will say, okay, the range shouldn't be able to penetrate through there. Well, if you get horizontal rain and wind blowing at the container on top of your wind, you're going to get water penetration. That was a lesson we learned early on with our own containers. We didn't sell any units with those. We generally try to build everything first ourselves, do dry runs of it, do dry runs of new evolutions to make sure they work, and then sell them to customers. That's kind of one of the hallmarks of our new units, or not new units. We've been making them like this now for 2.5 years, but with these large awning-based intakes. So it's like a big vent that comes off, extends off the side of the container. It's similar to the design that you would find on a natural gas turbine. It's not something we invented, but it allows you to increase the surface area of the amount of filter substrate. And then also the water has to actually travel that much further to actually be able to get into the container versus a looper where you've only got 4 inches. Our awnings sit out about 4 feet, which goes a long way to help with it. I mean, that was definitely one of the early lessons. And the other is really understanding the nuances of electrical code, and being willing to question the contractors or trades that sometimes are working for you. Oftentimes, and it's not to discredit anybody, oftentimes somebody's done something one way for a long time. They just assume that's the only way it can be done, and anything else is, not legal or not to code. But there's lots of things that lots of electricians, just because they aren't familiar with it doesn't mean they're wrong, but there's other ways to do things than just the standard way. So, I mean, those are definitely two of the things that I've learned over the last 2 years that would stick out.
Yeah. And then from
3 years, I should say.
Taking a step back from the design side, I mean, as you mentioned, there's a lot that goes into this. We're still really early in the industry, and it's pretty exciting to see where it's going to continue to go in the future. But aside from just the purely design side, what are some of those other ways that you've continued to try and optimize operations, maybe more on the software side or automation side?
Yeah, we really dived into that in the start of 2020. I wanted to make our containers more smart. It historically had been pretty cost prohibitive. I mean, not that certain installations weren't doing it, but the cost on a per miner basis versus what it would cost out a human there was quite high. We've now launched our own line of smart PDUs and gone beyond just monitoring and being able to turn it on and off. And
also, just sorry to cut you off, but just for everyone who doesn't know what a PDU is, can you talk a little bit about how PDUs play into all this?
Yeah, sorry. Sometimes you get tunnel vision and just assume you're in a space and everybody knows what you're talking about. So PDU is a power distribution unit. In some instances, it doubles as your electrical panel. In our case, it does. So it's, in our case, there's a large main breaker at the top, and then you've got all your branch breakers, similar to what you'd find on a household or industrial electrical panel. And then generally in the case of a PDU, those breakers go directly to an outlet, which you could plug your miner into. You have basic or dumb PDUs, as people call them, which would just have a simple breaker function. And then a smart PDU can have, there's a variety of tiers of smart PDUs, and this is not something that's specific to the blockchain space. Data center as a whole use it as well, and they've used it for a long time, where you can switch each port on and off. You can monitor each port to know how much current's going through it. And then you can get into Gen 2 and Gen 3 smart PDUs, which will have atmospheric sensors built into the PDU. So it's monitoring temperature, humidity. In the case of our PDUs, they can measure differential pressure, which allows you to tell how much vacuum you have in the space, so you can start to tell if your filters are clogging up. So yeah, that's kind of a high level of what goes into the smart PDUs, or what a smart PDU is rather. What we've been trying to move into now is creating more smart automation and rules and watchdogs that can be built into the PDU to alleviate the need for human interaction. As we all know, running S9s 90% of the time when something's acting up, it just needs to be unplugged and plugged back in. So on our PDU, you can tell it, hey, this port is an S9. It should be consuming this amount of wattage. You set your minimum threshold, so if it drops below 20% for more than 5 minutes, the PDU will automatically do a reset. It'll try that a couple times. If it doesn't work, it'll send a text or an email out to the out to the network admin to let them know, call it necessary to actually go see it. Because most of the time, that's all it required. It didn't actually require somebody physically to go out there, which saves quite a bit of time.
Yeah, definitely. That I can definitely say that that's something that will save a lot of time, especially from just the human interaction side with these machines.
One of the other neat things we're working on right now, it's basic, but it saves a pile of time when you do a deployment. It's a mechanism so the PDU can figure out which miner is on which outlet and label the IP address to that. So what it does is it pings all the devices on the network and then slowly turns them off, on and off one by one. It takes about an hour to go through it totally to do it properly. But it'll correspond with, as soon as it turns that port off, which IP dropped. And then you now know on your PDU which IP is which port. Because when you're plugging in, 1,000 S9s that all look identical, or whatever miners that all look identical, and you're using DHCP, it's often difficult to identify which IP is which miner's on which port. These are all things we're just trying to, from experience in terms of doing deployments and putting miners out, features that I wish I had when we were doing it for the first while that we were trying to implement.
Yeah, I mean, just keeping track of all of those miners, you kind of don't realize how important it is until you've gone and you built like your first facility, and you kind of realize that just having that organization is really just going to save so much time in the long run.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
So Scott, one of the things that I would say is going to be very important for the mining industry moving forward is the concept of load shedding or a peaker shaver type program. And maybe if you could talk a little bit about what exactly load shedding or something like that for a miner entails and why it's beneficial and something that miners should pay attention to.
Yes, certainly. So that varies obviously a lot based on the region you're in. Different utilities will have different programs based on how they price their electricity. Texas, for example, with ERCOT, will settle 15 minutes before, so you know what the price is going to be 15 minutes ahead of time. If you're not on a prefixed contract, you can play that market and have your power turned on and off based on when the price is going up. Other markets, New York, it's the day ahead. As an example, with our smart PDUs, what we've been working to integrate is the ability to automate that process. So right now you can schedule when your off times are going to be. And then we're adding a feature where it can use an outside Oracle or a piece of data to define when it turns on and off. So for example, you can point the PDU to the ERCOT website in your particular market. You can read what the power price is, and you can say, okay, look, if it's going to go above 5 cents a kilowatt hour or 7 cents a kilowatt hour, we want to be off, which is generally that's a fine threshold because you're not always going to be at 7 cents. Other times you might be at 1.7 or 2 cents in the middle of the night. It's your blended average that you're mainly concerned about. And then the smart PDU will cascade all the devices off slowly, so it doesn't just shut off 1 megawatt or 2 megawatts all at once, which can be quite hard on the system. It'll slowly turn it off, and then it'll slowly turn it back on, so you don't get a huge amount of inrush current into your system. Yeah, so that's something we've been working on quite closely. You can use a variety of factors. You can use external power pricing. You can use temperature. So as an example, if you're running off a natural gas genset, your data center is going to get quite hot when you're above 105 degrees, but your generator also can't run at full speed, or not at full speed, at full output at higher temperatures. You have a derating factor once you start to go above, I think it depends on the motor, between 85 to 95 degrees Fahrenheit. So the PDU can be monitoring that temperature and slowly curtail load based on whatever inputs you've defined. This is all, everything's variable, everything's programmable. We also have an open API. Some clients like to program their own stuff. They have their own miner management, and they want to have that interact with our smart PDU so they can take and control that on any level they want.
Yeah. And I mean, this is just you touched on so many important things there. I mean, just from a mining perspective, especially for all of you out there who are miners, this is something that you really would benefit from figuring out. And the reason for that is, as you touched on, you can tie into the floating rate that the pricing in ERCOT is, for example, and kind of govern through APIs the most that you're willing to pay for power. So every time that you speak with a miner, they'll give you some sort of power rate, how much they're paying for power. This other option allows you to go with the real-time market, and you could be buying power for 1.5 cents, 2 cents, 4 cents, 5 cents, 7 cents. But the thing is that if you're tied into the real-time pricing, the big problem is that there are peak hours of the year where just the pricing is off the charts expensive, and it doesn't make sense to mine if you're paying 150 cents per kilowatt hour. And so then in those types of cases, your machine, if you're tied into an API, would automatically shut off, and you would only be mining at a maximum threshold of, as you mentioned in that example, 7 cents, which from a miner's perspective, you can procure a much lower cost of power if you have a system like that set up. And I think that's really important and great that you touched on that, to let everyone know that they have that ability. If they're trying to get that power rate down, they can just go and tie into the real-time pricing.
Yeah, another feature or benefit that comes with that, in a lot of markets, Texas included, a lot of your transmission and delivery cost is set based on how much you were consuming during peak times. So if you've automated the process to make sure that you're always off during peak times, you can eliminate or almost eliminate or greatly reduce at least your transmission and delivery costs, which in many instances makes up a large portion of the bill. You get your net power and then the T&D that comes along with it. So that can definitely go a long way to further help reduce the bill.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of crazy when the more that I dove into the way that the economics of the power industry worked and everything else, I was just blown away by how much money is made during those peak hours and in terms of the pricing. And I mean, as a miner, you definitely don't want to be paying those high rates, but then you realize the flip side of that, where if you're not turned on during those extremely high times, your average power rate is extremely, extremely low. Yep. And I mean, the other big piece of that is that as a mining company, you have a huge advantage compared to other miners if you do the strategy, but a huge advantage to other industries, because many other industries don't have the ability to shut off on a dime, whereas miners, we're fine with that.
Yeah, we did some analysis on a couple, I think it was Texas North Hub and Houston Hub. If you were down for just 3 to 4% of the year, you were averaging sub 3 cent net power. It's still T&D above that, but you can almost eliminate a good chunk of that charge if you're buying at a transmission voltage, and your transmission charge is going to be based on your 4 peak points of the year. Most of the time, you're going to be off. By doing that, most of those peak points are also the days when it's insanely hot out. So you're also alleviating that stress on your equipment. And then another feature built into the PDU is oftentimes when you turn off 2,000 devices and you turn them back on, not all 2,000 of those devices will start up properly. So the PDUs will monitor those devices, give them adequate time to boot up. And then if they haven't booted up, they'll perform a power cycle automatically. So a lot of, especially with S9s, it's not as bad of a problem with a lot of the newer gen stuff, but with S9s, you could turn off 2,000 miners, turn them back on, and maybe 1,500 will start up, or 1,700. And you're going to spend, half the day going through that cycle, getting the devices started back up. And if you're doing that daily, the times that your staff are going to spend on it wouldn't be daily, but you're going to spend quite a bit staff-wise trying to identify which miners weren't running, and you're going to rapidly offset your power savings because you didn't have those miners running and being turned back on as quickly as possible. So the smart PDU system we have automates a lot of that process.
Energy costs can make or break a crypto mining operation. Successful crypto miners all need low-cost electricity. Sazmining has partnered with Amerex to give crypto miners the best procurement strategy for natural gas and low-cost electricity. Go to sazmining.com/Amerex, that's spelled AMEREX, to see if you qualify for Amerex's energy procurement services. Once again, visit sazmining.com/Amerex to be served up some of the most competitive electricity rates globally. And then in terms of what you guys have decided to focus on, it seems like you have the ability on the build out side, hosting side, automation side. What do you see moving forward for the company as well as your role within the broader mining industry?
We've really been moving a lot into the stranded and flare gas type projects, not actively as an operator, but as an equipment provider to a variety of different people's or companies rather. Some will white label and relabel our product. Some will just market it as it is. Our new mini pod line is a 12-foot by 7.5-foot unit that can be picked up with a forklift. It doesn't require any assembly in the field. Complete steel construction can just be dropped on the ground and plugged directly into a generator. That has probably been our largest growth market over the last 6 months. I think we sold 100 units and we've delivered almost 45 of those units in the last 6 months alone. So that's been growing quite quickly. We're doing quite a bit of research and development on the smart PDU side, both for regular data center and for the blockchain space. And then lastly, it'll be a while before we come to market with something, but we've been doing a lot of research and product development on both an immersion and a relatively unique power supply unit or PSU replacement that can actually do numerous miners at once through a single PSU.
Yeah. Actually, on the immersion side, you're one of the, I would say, handful of companies out there that are exploring immersion, trying to actually come up with your own immersion type design. Maybe talk about what immersion cooling actually is and what some of the benefits you see a miner getting if they decided to move in that direction.
To be honest, it's something we're just starting to dabble in research. So we're a while before we have an MVP that we start to push. But I mean, there's a whole variety of benefits. I mean, it was quite prohibitive for some time because of the cost of the liquid to actually immerse the device in. So immersion cooling is when you take a device and place it in liquid and use that liquid as a transfer medium to remove the heat from the chip rather than using air. It's quite an efficient way of doing it. There's both two-phase and single-phase immersion. Single phase is when the liquid changes state, or sorry, single phase is when it does not change state, so it stays as a liquid, and you could pump it into a heat exchanger or to a dry cooler and exhaust the heat through that mechanism, either through, in the case of a heat exchanger, you usually would have water glycol loop that would go out to some other medium to exhaust that heat. In two-phase, there are some guys that experimented with it early on for the purpose of blockchain. I don't really see anybody using it right now, but two-phase is when the liquid actually boils rapidly on the surface of the chip and turns into a gas, then goes and hits a heat exchange coil and releases that heat and drops back down. There have been several people that have done that for the blockchain space. I don't see it or haven't seen it recently. That doesn't mean they're not out there. And I'm not doing as much research as I should, so I hope I don't get a nasty email from somebody who's saying that there's a huge player in the space that I didn't know about.
Sounds good. Yeah. And then one of the interesting things on the liquid cooling side, just diving in a little bit more depth there, is really just the ability to preserve the longevity of the chips. I mean, having that, and that's one of the things just from a miner perspective that I feel like a lot of people outside the mining space might not be aware of, is that, I mean, computer hardware, it doesn't automatically always work all the time. There are failures. There are times where miners are going to go down, and it's not as easy as just going on to crypto compare and typing in your hash rate and typing in all these other things, pool fees, and getting a number spit out. And so in terms of thinking about miner longevity, or just approaching kind of planning, I would say, planning how long your miners are going to last, what are some of the things that you pay attention to or think about when you're thinking about that topic of miner longevity?
Well, I mean, obviously, if you don't have a properly filtered air-cooled based system, you are going to rapidly degrade your miner. And we see lots of that. And there's, people underestimate just how sealed your container needs to be in order to prevent fine dust and dirt getting in there, and that will rapidly degrade your miners further. If you're in an environment where you're in a salt water or near a saltwater body, or a high level of moisture, those things can all and I've seen S9s come in that have they look like literally somebody pulled them out of a lake, a muddy lake at that. And unless you're able to control all of those factors, which you can, and it can be done properly, immersion really removes a lot of those factors. You're in a relatively closed loop system. You can, if you've cleaned your miner properly and you're filtering your oil before it goes in there, or not your oil, your immersion fluid, you really can preserve that card. I don't know if I want to say indefinitely, because I mean, we haven't done the research or testing for that, but I know guys that have been running S9s and immersion that you pull them out, clean them with a solvent, the things look brand new when they come out.
Yeah. And one of the things that it's obviously affecting everyone right now in the mining space is actually just procuring and acquiring that hardware. So maybe just take the question however you want, but talk about how COVID has affected the crypto mining industry, and maybe when you get the chance, touch on how that's affected just the miner pricing and the availability of these different miners.
Yeah, to be honest, we try to stay as far away from miner procurement as possible. I can more speak to, I guess, the supply chain in terms of other components for building out the data center and how that's been affected. I'm seeing things in logistics coming out of China that I've never seen in my life. And I mean, I've been importing things from China for over 15 years. I had a shipping container of fans we purchased in the start of January. They were ready January 20th, I think. That would normally be 5 weeks to Toronto. It's supposed to arrive at the end of March now, in excess of 2 months, which is crazy. And not only that, it originally was costing $3,000 to $4,000 for a 40-foot high cube. I think we paid $8,000 for that one single container to ship over here. Pieces that you just come to expect is available have had ridiculous lead times. The North American steel market the pricing has just ballooned through the roof. Getting sheet metal, as we moved into making our own containers and making our own enclosures, we buy the raw sheet metal and get it in coils and have it sheeted down for us. We used to be able to just pick up the phone, call and order 30,000 pounds of metal, and it'd be here by Friday. That's a month and a half if we want that kind of volume. So we're having to pre-purchase the stuff well in advance. Trying to think of other components, even circuit breaks, just everything, any and every component that we have that's coming in, unless it's something we have in stock, has almost doubled to tripled the lead time. Fortunately, we were into a spot going into 2021 where we were able to stock up and kind of had a feeling things were going to start to continue to get busy, and we stocked up pretty heavily. So we're in a good spot inventory wise now, fortunately.
Yeah,
I know it doesn't really answer the question it doesn't really answer the question on the miners all that much. But yeah, it's not something that I can speak to with a whole lot of authority. It's always been, in these kind of gold rush or Bitcoin rushes times a year, it's always insane to try and get miners. I mean, I remember when we were building our first GPU container, trying to get 300 or 400 graphics cards, and what was it, January and February 2019, it was insane. You're paying like $600 for a card, $600 US.
Yeah, the gamers definitely are not happy with the crypto miners. I read an article the other day that I think NVIDIA had put out, just saying that they're going to have to make a crypto mining specific graphics card, just because all of the all their graphics cards that are traditionally being sold off to the gamers are just being eaten up by the miners.
Well, I thought I read, so I've not stayed too up on them. I thought I read something about they were trying to make a modified version that just would not work for crypto mining. It's something in the firmware where if it was detecting that it was doing that, it would prevent it from doing crypto mining. I can't remember the article or not.
Yeah. I mean, it's just fascinating how our industry just affects all these other, is affected by all these other industries, like, and obviously just on the manufacturing side, COVID, and then even the minor procurement. That's another piece where I feel like it's kind of unique from other industries, because rather than it just being a cost plus type of arrangement, they're actually pricing a lot of these miners based on the ROI times. And so as a miner, it's really important that you're getting in at the right parts of the cycle, and you're not overpaying for equipment, especially with these different bull and bear markets, which leads me into this next question of right now, as of today, what's the price of Bitcoin at? Like 50 something?
54, 50, I thought 54? This morning.
Okay. Yeah. So as of this morning, 54,000, and we're sitting at March 9th. So from where we are today and where you see the industry moving forward, where would you estimate we are in this cycle of this bull market? It's a very, very difficult question, but I'm always interested to hear Mario's point of view.
I try not to play the pricing game. I think we'll see 20s again this year, but I also think we could see the 2x of where we are right now. Like, we're used to that volatility though. Like, we've been around it. Like, it's always funny when you see the new, the new breed or the new round of people that got into crypto. Like, oh my God, it dropped 16% today. I'm like, it's Tuesday. It's normal. But yeah, 100K is not a crazy call. But again, there's going to be a huge, massive pullback, like a big dump at some point in time. But I don't play the trading game whatsoever. But there seems to be a massive pile of support in the high 30s right now. It's tried to fall off below that a couple times and hasn't been able to. So we'll see.
Yeah. Yeah, it's one of those things where it's so hard to say. And I think that people who've been around the space are just used to that volatility. Whereas anyone else, I mean, they come into this industry and it's like the world's falling apart when you see a 16% drop.
Yeah, it's like, 2 weeks ago, everybody's like, yeah, Bitcoin crashed. Oh my God, it crashed. Yeah, to 10 times our lowest low of last year. Like, who cares?
Yeah. Yeah. It's always talked about when it's crashing, but they don't really address too often that, like, a year ago, it was a completely different zone of resistance. Yeah. So in terms of the kind of stepping away from the crypto side and onto just generally outside of the industry, what your favorite book is, what would you say is the book that has shaped the way that you think about the world, or a book that you would recommend to someone else who's listening?
Watch your podcast. I've seen the question. I think I'm torn between two. Like, I like business books. Shoe Dog was a great book, and Jack Welch is Winning.
Interesting. What's your I guess going into each of those books, what was the most valuable thing or takeaway that you had from each of those books?
Hearing guys that I highly respect, hearing their struggles, like hearing their points of where they feel they were failing, and how they dealt with that, how they evolved from that, and how they learned from that, and in depth. I mean, I think I've read maybe not all of Jack Welch's books, but the majority of them, and he goes into all of his, various, failures, if they were that, and Shoe Dog was just his entire struggle in forming and building Nike, both the wins and the losses through it. I find that stuff very inspiring. I find myself watching a lot of Elon Musk's earlier stuff, talking about his challenges and his struggles. I mean, he's somebody I greatly respect and admire. Hearing these hugely successful, not just monetarily wise, but like people that were successful in creating something that almost nobody's been able to create, and hearing their struggles and being able to relate to that in the early days is very inspiring.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite things to go do. Especially when I'll go and dive down that YouTube rabbit hole, just pulling up some of those interviews from like 2000, 2012, just a long time ago, 2008, and just kind of seeing what they were going through at that point in time. It's pretty inspiring and really crazy just taking a look back and kind of hearing the way that they thought about the world or what they were doing at that time.
Yeah, agreed completely. I was literally doing that this morning on the drive into my car, a bunch of older Elon Musk interviews.
Yeah, actually, on the topic of those earlier interviews, I was watching, just trying to stay up to date with what was happening in the space and listening to some of Michael Saylor's recent arguments or pro Bitcoin arguments that he was making. And they actually have some interviews online from Michael Saylor, I think in 2000 and 2012, kind of talking about some of his predictions for the future and some of the stuff that he was writing about in his book, The Mobile Wave. And that's another example of just someone who early on kind of had that technologist, like visionary type of view on how things were going to play out. And then it's kind of crazy to see how accurate some of those predictions were. Just like, I mean, how like Google, Apple, Amazon, Facebook were just going to explode over the year because you had all these people who are going to go and be, there are going to be more people in the world with iPhones. And so those companies were just perfectly positioned to disrupt a lot of industries and acquire a lot of market share.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Awesome. Have to check that out.
Yeah, I'll definitely send it over to you.
Yeah, please do.
And then in terms of your final, this question I've asked in some form or another on previous podcasts, but this time I'm going to change it up. I'm going to give you a choice of which one you want to answer here. So okay. The question is, or I guess the challenge is, you're speaking with someone and you're trying to turn them into a Bitcoin believer or potentially get them to invest in Bitcoin, and you only have 60 seconds to do so. The choice that you have is that you can either make that conversation with just a friend who is a skeptic of Bitcoin or an investor who is thinking about investing in Bitcoin. You have 60 seconds. Which one do you want to go for?
I mean, it could be either. I think my argument would be the same.
All right, I mean, let's hear it.
I mean, to those, if you think Bitcoin's a scam, I mean, what do you think the dollar is? Like, I mean, it was originally a token based on gold, and then it was a token based on fractional gold, and then it was your gold that you had to give in, they made you give in your gold first, then you got a token back on it, then they sold a little bit of your gold and you kept the same amount of tokens, and then they sold all of your gold and you kept the same amount of tokens, and then they deflated your tokens and made them worth less. I mean, Bitcoin is fixed. It doesn't, we know exactly how many of them are there. It can't be inflated. It can't be deflated. It is, it is digital gold. I mean, people use the analogy all the time. I don't think it's going to be something you can transact with, but if you want something that's stable against deflation, when you have international governments printing trillions and trillions of dollars, deflating your net worth, it is the only stable rock you can hold on to. Well said.
I like the path that you took there.
But I've used the same argument with people all the time. It's like when you think, it's crazy when you think about what we've come to accept with our nation states currencies, and like just okay, we're just going to print $2 trillion because the country needs it and everybody else is going to do it. It's absolutely insane.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things that I was just thinking about the other day. It's just when you kind of take a step back and look at the full picture of how the entire system runs today, I think that it's not even it's of course in a lot of our hands to educate and get people aware of how the system works and how the Bitcoin system works. But once you understand those fundamentals, it's more so on just the fiat system explaining why it deserves to stay operating the way that it is. I mean, if you are under the assumption that that money is just a representation of work and energy in a society, when you print and expand the monetary supply by 15%, you're essentially stealing 15% of the work and energy from everyone who's using that currency. And I think that that's something, like that idea is something that isn't well understood. And it's a solution to that problem is something like Bitcoin, or something that no single entity or government can suddenly change the supply of.
Yep, agree completely. Like, I mean, to some of the other sample questions you had there, I think within the next 5 years, you will see more and more nation states taking Bitcoin as a reserve currency to act as a state inflation hedge against their own currencies, because it's going to get so crazy with inflation. And what other assets outside of gold can you do that with?
That's a good question. I mean,
arguably Bitcoin is more stable in terms of like inflation of inventory. I mean, the price is all over the map, but that's just because of the small amount of circulation in terms of dollars relation to gold. But it's far more stable in terms of the amount available. I mean, gold can go and be mined, right? There's a lot of gold that's unaccounted for, in circulation, that's not in circulation. Bitcoin, it's all out there. We all know exactly how much is there.
Yeah, I say this a lot, but I really do view Bitcoin as the most transparent monetary policy that's ever been created. And I think that in terms of the features that make gold very attractive as an inflation hedge asset, Bitcoin is far and away better on each of those different characteristics. It's just that a lot of the world is still coming to learn about the technology. And as you mentioned, it's something that's definitely going to take some time, and it's still in the very early stages.
Yeah. Well, and you're seeing it with corporations starting to use it as an internal reserve currency of their own. And I mean, it's the more progressive ones, obviously, but I think you're going to see more and more of that throughout the year. And then eventually, it's not going to be Canada, US, and the UK doing it right away, but you'll definitely see smaller countries within the next couple of years.
Yeah, I was speaking with one of my friends the other day, and they understand some of the fundamentals. They're not working in the space, definitely not at a deep understanding of how all of these things work. And I just asked them a simple question. I said, do you think that Apple, Amazon, Facebook are ever going to add Bitcoin to their reserves, knowing what's happening to the dollar? And they just kind of sat there for a second. And then like that was the thing that suddenly you could see their eyes and the gears turning in their head, where they kind of realized, oh, wait, I don't see a world where at some point these Fortune 500 companies and large companies don't start incorporating Bitcoin as a way to protect their treasury or their reserve with all the monetary stimulus going on. And so, I mean, if you kind of believe in that world where there is going to be corporations adopting some sort of a treasury management strategy, then we're still in chapter 1 or 2 of this industry. So one of the most important considerations, especially when anyone's investing in mining or going to build out their own mining operation, is just from a regulatory perspective, am I going to be able to continue mining in this country? And we've seen in some other countries, I would consider them more rogue states, that have banned Bitcoin mining, and then kind of pulled a full 180. And in the case of, for example, Venezuela and Pakistan, ban crypto mining, and then all of a sudden go and mine for the government. Obviously, as a cryptocurrency miner, we don't want to have to deal with all of those things and worry about actually being able to run our operations. And so from your perspective, how do you look at where you're going to build these operations? What do you see as I would say, more favorable jurisdictions to not have to worry about getting shut down from a government? And how do you think about all of that when you're looking to build out a facility?
Yeah, generally speaking, we sell our units to the end customer that's going to be doing the deployment. However, we have had some exposure to that with Venezuela, for instance, where we really had to kind of backpedal from trying to sell or allowing anything to be directly sold into there, because I mean, our device could be kind of seen as a mechanism to facilitate sanctions, right? Because I mean, that's why a lot of these nation states kind of went the whole 180 on it. At first, Venezuela was like, no, we don't want this. And like, oh, wait a second, we can now find a way to get, we can convert our oil domestically into a currency that we can freely move across the border and skirt all of the sanctions that the US and other countries have put on Venezuela. It wasn't worth enough. It definitely wasn't worth the risk to even have to defend that action in selling the units into the US. It's tough enough being in the crypto space already. I remember when we started trying to set up a bank account, just because our description had blockchain, even though we didn't have anything, like we don't actually physically deal with the currency as a manufacturer. We had two different banks shut down our accounts at first during the end of 2017, start of 2018, just because they were so anything blockchain, they were stopping it. So that kind of made us a little shy to be able to dive into anything that might be questionable in terms of any authority's minds. In terms of the regulation around Bitcoin, I guess in my opinion, we're not seeing a lot of it on Bitcoin itself. It's generally the converting into fiat. They're kind of using that as the control mechanism, where you can do whatever you want with Bitcoin. It's when you want to convert it to cash. Now that's Bitcoin specific. It doesn't apply to security tokens or all that other stuff. There's a variety of regulation around that. But when it comes to actual Bitcoin, I personally haven't seen a whole pile of regulation around what you can and can't do in terms of transacting with Bitcoin. It's when you want to convert it into fiat that we're seeing most of the control mechanisms from various governments.
Yeah, definitely. And it's funny that you mentioned the bank account piece, because that was another thing that I was running into earlier on, is just having bank accounts shut down on us or being denied access to use the bank. And I kind of came to the conclusion that at all points in time, we need at least two bank accounts ready, because if one of them gets shut down, we need to make sure we still have a bank that we can actually use.
Yeah, and even now, like for taking Bitcoin payment for payment on our containers, we still won't touch it. I mean, we use a firm here in Toronto, Secure Digital Markets, to help facilitate all of that and handle all of the AML and KYC, just because I don't want the risk of doing any of that wrong and some regulation coming in down the road and then being like wanting to audit every single transaction and have to deal with, just everything that comes along with that, and possibly just not tarnish, but just have to deal with the extra head, because they've made it so cumbersome to be able to do it legitimately. Not that we wouldn't be doing it legitimately, but just to deal with everything that goes into taking $100,000 payment in Bitcoin for AML and KYC wise. We've outsourced that side of it. Yeah. We do accept it, but we've outsourced it.
Yeah, definitely. And that's another thing too, is just from a miner perspective, I feel like the infrastructure has gotten a lot better from being able to actually track your mining rewards and the payouts, and then making sure that you're paying the taxes properly, just because there's so much legwork that needs to be done to do that properly based on the current tax law. So maybe it's a little different in Canada, but in the US, it's definitely a lot of work. And thankfully the tools and the tracking systems now are a little bit better equipped to help a miner do that.
Yeah, definitely. We've come a long way in 3 years.
Yeah, great. Well, Scott, this has been an absolute pleasure speaking with you. Thank you so much for coming on, and we will have to get you on in another episode in the future.
Thank you very much for having me, and I'm very much looking forward to it.